Hello everyone, I'm going to talk about the double displacement reaction experiment. So for the experimental design, I had everything pre-planned. I followed the steps. They were pretty simple this time since there was no heating involved or nothing to do with fire. This was relatively safe experiment than the previous one. Overall, it took me about 45 to 50 minutes to complete this experiment and then wait for an entire day to dry the calcium carbonate in the filter paper. Overall, I felt this experiment was pretty straightforward, and the safety precautions, since there was no fire involved and none of the chemical would react with each other to cause flames. The safety measures were pretty simple. I wore gloves and glasses while calcium carbonate and calcium chloride and sodium carbonate were dissolving in water. I kept it away from me so I won't inhale the gases if they're coming out. This was my safety and experimental design. Now moving on to the results. So I didn't print out the lab, but I prepared the rough table here, and I'll prepare a new table once I'm done. So mass of the calcium chloride was 2 grams, mass of sodium carbonate was 2 grams, mass of filter paper was 2.2 grams. So overall, the calcium chloride when dissolved in distilled water, the solution was clear. Sodium carbonate also dissolved clearly in the solution, but when mixed together, the solution turned white. And it took about 15 minutes for the calcium carbonate to form and settle on the bottom of the beaker. Then I put it in the filter paper. I left it about 10 minutes in filter paper to let all the distilled water flow through, and put in some isopropyl alcohol. Put that in, and then right now my filter paper is pretty dry. I do feel some dampness. This is due to the weather because it's been raining outside for the last 2 days. But overall, the weight of the filter paper was 4.4 grams. I can show it to you real quick. Yeah, so 4.4 grams, including the calcium carbonate. So since the mass of filter paper is 2.2 grams, mass of product was 2.2 grams as well. Now for the critical thinking part, how can this type of chemistry be used in water treatment plant to soften hard water? So I did some research. So sodium carbonate is also known as washing soda, and it is soluble in water. So once we add this sodium carbonate in the water, what happens is that calcium ions in the water separate out. So the heavy elements precipitates at the bottom of the water, thus making the water soft. Other elements that react to this would be magnesium. So in short, just by adding washing soda or sodium carbonate into the hard water, what happens is that the solution is soluble in water. So sodium atoms and carbonate atoms separate out each other, and in turn they react with hard water where they separate out the calcium ions, and this calcium ions then precipitates at the bottom, and thus this is how we make hard water into soft water. Now since this is like the third experiment that we have done, I would like to show you the graphs that I have prepared for the previous 3 modules. So module 1 was not an experiment, was just the simple safety precautions, so I didn't make any chart for that, but I made charts for my module 2, module 3, and this one, module 4. So when we look at it, so this is my chart for module 2. So if you remember, module 2 was about to note the we were given 5 compounds: sodium chloride, sodium carbonate, lithium, and all those compounds were to be put in the candle and notice a change in the color. So during that time, I had the biggest trouble in setting up the experiment because I was not following the commands of inoculating loop and how to put clay on it, because there were no pictures. So initially my confidence level was pretty low, but once I performed the experiment on one compound, I was pretty comfortable moving forward. Writing electronic configuration, clay and candle setup, noting correct colors of the compound. I spelled compound wrong, and critical thinking part of the video. So I think the most challenging part in the module 2 was setting up the experiment. That is how to put the clay on the inoculating loop and everything. It was pretty simple, but it's just that I was scared because it was me first time doing it. And critical thinking part was also a bit tricky the first time, but eventually I got hang of it. Now we move on to the module 3. So module 3 was where we had 2 experiments last time. So the biggest hurdle I had last time was to use of sterno, because sterno was something new, and it could burn you because it's an ethanol gel. So I was scared of doing that, and I was still scared of using it again after doing the experiment, because once again, you can never be casual around those things. Then other thing was to set up the experiment where I had to hold the beaker like this. So that was something that I was scared of, but it's just that I hadn't done it before. That's why I was nervous. The other part would be calculating the mass of copper effectively. I knew I could calculate it properly, but I did it as well. Determining the correct electronic configuration, predict the outcome of the melting compounds. This is the second experiment where we had sucrose, stearic acid, and sodium chloride, and we had to see whether this compound burns and what happens. Like sugar melts into brownish color, stearic acids melts quickly, and so on and so forth. And the last one is identifying the limitations to carry out the experiment. We had to point out the limitations in the experiment that could cause faults in the outcome of the experiment. And the last one today is the module 4. So I used the same example that was given, because pretty much that is what I felt. Overall, this experiment I was pretty comfortable with. The only trouble I had was to predict the product of displacement reaction, because I had some idea about what is soluble and what is not soluble, but they had no clue had little idea, but was not entirely sure how would they react when calcium chloride and sodium carbonate would be mixed with each other. But now I am pretty clear with the overall experiment setup, and I think I enjoyed this experiment. And that's it for my post-reflection video. Thank you, everyone.